Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. The propaganda ahead of the Glasgow climate meeting is coming in pretty high volume. The propaganda is pretty overwhelming, so let's just look at it one small chunk at a time. Seth Bornstein from the Associated Press says, Earth gets hotter, deadlier during decades of climate talks. World leaders have been trying to do something about climate change for 29 years, but in that time Earth has gotten much hotter and more dangerous. Wildfires in the United States have more than doubled in how much they have burned. From 1983 to 1992, wildfires consumed an average of 2.7 million acres a year. From 2011 to 2020, the average was up to 7.5 million acres, according to the National Interagency Fire Center. Wow, that sounds really bad. Let's look at his claim first that Earth has become much deadlier over the last 29 years. Over the past century, death rates from all types of natural disasters, including weather, are down about 97%. But there has been a very small increase since the record low decade of the 1990s. So Seth Bornstein's claim was based on ignoring all of the data before the 1990s, when death rates were much higher. That's not very honest journalism. Now let's look at his claim about burn acreage increasing since 1983. 90 years ago, burn acreage was much higher in the United States than it has been in recent years. But Seth Bornstein cherry-picked the year 1983 to start his comparison, which was one of the lowest years on record. There has been a small increase in burn acreage in the United States since his reference time frame of 1983 to 1992. And this year, which was advertised as a record burn year, burn acreage was about half of the long-term average and down more than 80% from 90 years ago. This data was from the National Interagency Fire Center, and I'll be discussing this more in a minute. The United States Forest Service shows exactly the same pattern. And the New York Times reported the same data in 1938. They said there was a fire every 3 minutes in 1937, which burned almost 22 million acres. And they said burn acreage in 1937 was considerably lower than that of 1936. The data which the New York Times used was from the Forest Service of the Department of Agriculture. And the current Forest Service graph matches the 1938 New York Times article. 22 million acres burned in 1937, which was considerably lower than 1936. So almost 22 million acres burned in 1937, but Seth Bornstein is complaining about 7.5 million acres over the past decade. In other words, burn acreage is down by 2/3 from 1937 and much more than from 1936. By starting his data in 1983, he's hiding all of the high burn acreage years from earlier in the century. Now let's look at the history of how this data is being hidden. This is what the National Interagency Fire Center showed on January 29th of this year. Earlier this year, they showed burn acreage all the way back to 1926, and it was over 50 million acres per year during 1930 and 1931. But if we go to that same web page now, we see something completely different. The Biden administration is hiding all the data prior to the record low year of 1983, and their excuse is written here. Prior to 1983, the federal wildland fire agencies did not track official wildfire data using current reporting processes. As a result, there is no official data prior to 1983 posted on this site. It's not very surprising that as electronic communications increased, new processes would be developed for reporting data. And the Biden administration is using that excuse to hide all of this inconvenient data from before 1983. And that's not the only data the Biden administration is hiding. They're also hiding this 20-year-old report from all of the key government agencies. The report said, in the conterminous United States during the pre-industrial period from 1500 to 1800, an average of 145 million acres burned annually. But Seth Bornstein is complaining about 7.5 million acres, which is down more than 90% from the 16th century. Seth Bornstein's goal is to blame carbon dioxide for recent forest fires. But burn acreage was much higher during the 16th century, when carbon dioxide was at pre-industrial levels. The historical record destroys their story, so they had to erase and rewrite history. This snapshot was taken on November 1st, 2020, the day before the election. But if we go to that same National Interagency Fire Center webpage today, we see something completely different. They've erased critical information for understanding the climate and replaced it with this disclaimer. The National Interagency Fire Center is committed to making its information and communication technologies accessible to individuals with disabilities. This is some pretty spectacular cynicism from the Biden administration. They're deleting critical data while bragging about making data accessible. And they're hiding their malfeasance and fraud behind people with disabilities. Now let's look at their excuse again for hiding the data prior to 1983. They say that the reporting processes have changed and therefore they're not going to let us see it anymore. Let's compare that way of thinking to how climate alarmists handle other pieces of key data. Penn State University describes Michael Mann's hockey stick as the iconic graph at the center of the climate debate. In this famous 1999 ClimateGate email, Phil Jones described it a little bit differently. He said, "I've just completed Mike's nature trick of adding in the real temps to each series for the last 20 years, i.e. from 1981 onwards, and from 1961 for Keith's, to hide the decline." The cartoonist Josh explained how Mike's nature trick worked. Here is the tree ring data. It's a proxy for past temperatures. Trouble is, it goes down when modern thermometers go up. So we deleted the part that looked wrong and joined them all up. So the iconic graph, which climate alarmism is based on, involves splicing together different types of data and hiding inconvenient data, which shows a decline in temperatures. This is shameless fraud from the climate science community. They're willing to splice together many different types of incoherent data and hide any data which is inconvenient to their story. And at the same time, they use the flimsiest of excuses to hide the decline in fire-burn acreage. Let's finish this up with one last claim from Seth Borenstein that world leaders have been trying to curb global warming. World leaders have held dozens of climate meetings over the last 30 years, and they've had absolutely no impact on the growth of CO2 in the atmosphere. Every single one of them has been a scam. And this year, China, which is the world's #1 emitter of carbon dioxide, is not even showing up for the meeting. This guarantees that nothing that they do at this conference will make any difference, and carbon dioxide levels will continue to increase. It's just one more scam meeting from our governmental authorities. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on this big money fraud for the past 13 years. You can visit him, Kyrie, and Caesar on the web at realclimatescience.com.